What's going on, Facebook family? It's your
Okay,
main
I'll
man,
call
Joe
you
Dupree,
back. I'm
100
doing a
BLK, the
podcast
Black
right now.
Station, down here
Okay,
in
cool.
Lafayette, Louisiana, representing New Orleans, the whole entire South, because you know how we do it here down South. But I wouldn't be who I am or on the scene if I wasn't dealing with my brother on the East Coast, representing WBLS, my man, Brother Fatine. What's happening, my friend?
What's going on, Joe? Man, you see, man, we work up to the minute right before the camera comes on or the camera come on, man. We still working behind the scenes on the phones, doing different things, making things happen, man. But it's great to be here. To be with our audience for another great conversation, community conversations between myself and Joe Dupree, 100 Black in New Orleans, and of course WBLS FM New York, New York. As you say, different cities, same issues. So let's
Same
jump in here,
issues.
my brother. Let's
And
jump on
tonight
in.
we're going to get into some deep conversations. So tell a friend to tell a friend, share this with a friend, because tonight, when I say we're getting into some deep conversation, we're going to get into some deep conversation. I'm actually right now getting ready to share this with a few folks. So I infer you do the same thing.
Yes,
Share it with
sir.
a few people. Let them know that we are on. My brother there at WBLS. What y'all got going in New York, man? I saw Morgan Freeman on the show. What's happening? You
I
had
told
Morgan
you,
D.
man.
You had D. Morgan Freeman. Hey, don't worry. We got people like, hey, we about to do some things that's gonna mess y'all head up across the board, across the board. So you had Morgan Freeman on there. Can you hear me, Fatine?
Yeah, I got you. I got you. I hear you. So yeah, we had Morgan Freeman on, and Frankie Faison. If people don't know that name, Frankie Faison, he played on The Wire. He also
Right.
played the landlord in Coming to America. You understand? So that's
Wow.
Frankie Faison. But the reason why we brought those two gentlemen on is because of a film that is going to be on HBO coming up next week called The Killing of Kenneth Chamberlain Sr. Back in 2011, there was a medical alert that notified the ambulance and the police. Police got to Mr. Chamberlain's apartment, and Mr. Chamberlain said everything is okay, but the police just kept persistent. For him to open the door, they broke his door down, and they wound up shooting and killing him. So with Morgan
Wow.
Freeman, he's the executive producer of this film. Frankie Faison plays Kenneth Chamberlain Sr., and who's been fighting for justice for his father and the family is Kenneth Chamberlain Jr., who was also on the show. So we was talking about that particular issue right there, and Morgan and Frankie talked about their push and their support of leading these type of stories in Hollywood. And Frankie Faison also talked about his next project is dealing with Emmett Till. And then we got into something after that, which we're going to talk about today, the attack on African American history, attack on history, American history, and also this whole thing with critical race theory. So that's what we were doing in BLS. And just real quick, Joe, real quick, if people could go to WBLS.com, we are doing the second year of what is called Circle of Sisters beginning
Right.
December.
Right.
And
I
it's
was
going to
gonna
be
bring that up.
virtual. Yes, it's going to be virtual. And for folks, it's really very a well done program virtually. And for more information, just go to WBLS.com. Thank you for that, Joe.
Well, it's time for me to bring in our guest as we get into this conversation: critical race theory and the lost cause. So you always hear these terms being thrown around, but a lot of folks don't even know what it's about. So I reached out to a very good friend of mine, almost like a brother from another mother, Dr. Rick Swanson, who we are bringing in to have this conversation, because a lot of folks talk about critical race theory, the myth of the lost cause. At the end of it all, and Rick and I talk about this all the time, Dr. Swanson and I, that it seems to be some folks just don't want to tell the truth about how history really unfolded for whatever reason. I don't know if it's shame. I don't know if there's an issue with they just don't want the truth to be told. But we're going to get into the conversation. So, ladies and gentlemen, a professor at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, Dr. Rick Swanson in the building. When I tell you this man knows a lot about the lost cause, political science professor, he the man. He the man. So, Dr. Swanson, welcome to Community Conversations. How you doing, my brother?
Joe, my friend, it's always great to talk with you. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward.
So first, let me go to the expert. Since you're the professor, man, why in the world is critical race theory? Uh, I know, being a political science professor, this comes up in legal terms. This is really a legal term. So talk to me. What is this thing?
Well, it started as a legal theory in the early 80s. And here's the key thing to understand. You can have the accurate, unbiased, complete teaching of Black history and history in general without critical race theory. None of my research, none of my writings, none of my presentations have ever used critical race theory. Notice it's called critical race theory. So it's not critical race facts or critical race history. What it does is add an interpretation or an evaluation or a theoretical framework to the facts. And so there are different historical theories that one can apply to history, for example. One you might be familiar with would be the lost cause. The lost cause actually altered history and whitewashed history and said, the Civil War was not about slavery, and slavery was either non-existent or it was good, and it just hid the horrors of Jim Crow and Reconstruction violence. And so that was one theory applied to the facts. There's also a theory called American exceptionalism, that America is very unique in the world, not just unique, but really the most unique or the most exceptional. And that's an interpretation of American history. So critical race theory is an interpretation of American history that basically says racism is at the core of the United States. The current evolution of critical race theory, the most well-known comes out of, Ibram Kendi, How to Be an Anti-Racist, or Robin DiAngelo, White Fragility. And literally what they say is that everything and everyone is racist. Kendi says every institution, every policy, every race-neutral law is actually racist. He says there's no such thing as race-neutral policies or race-neutral laws. And Robin DiAngelo actually says every white person is a racist. And if you don't admit it, that just is further proof that you are a racist. So I kind of view critical race theory as sort of the opposite of the lost cause. The lost cause said no one is racist and nothing is racist. And critical race theory says everything and everyone is racist. But there is a very honest, accurate, happy middle that says, yeah, some people are racist, some policies are racist, but it's not this all or, not to say black or white, no pun intended, but it's not all or nothing, either or.
Okay. Let me just jump in here, just to comment on that real quick. So it's so interesting that he says this, and that's why when we bring up the whole piece with systemic racism, about how race is so intertwined into this society, especially American society, to the point that even though we don't have Jim Crow, we still have racism out here and in so many things that we were involved in. For instance, as you talked about looking at it from a theory point of view with the law, you have two trials that's going on now. That if you got rid of critical race theory or got rid of the whole conversation of talking about race and how it is in effect in law and everything else, then the Kyle Rittenhouse, the Ahmaud Arbery case would not be discussed, and you may not be able to discuss. And both of these cases, both of these cases stem from race. You got to realize the Kyle Rittenhouse comes from the shooting of Jacob Blake. You also see the Ahmaud Arbery is a black man that was tracked down and shot by three white gentlemen. Well, three men at the end of the day. So that's why this is so important to have this conversation, because at the end of the day, if we take race out of the conversation, then honestly, how honest is the conversation?
Yeah, exactly. Oh,
Swanson.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why I think that the problem with critical race theory is that it so distorts the issue that it makes people afraid to talk about race because they're instantly labeled a racist. And that's my point, is you can have complete and honest and accurate and really in-depth conversations about race without ever using or applying critical race theory. It's like I said, it's just one particular interpretation of historical facts. And actually, it's really a particular interpretation of current reality. It sees everything through that particular lens. but it's really dogmatic in that. It's not willing to look at the evidence or contrary evidence. It's not willing to debate. Ibram Kendi actually said there's no debating CRT. He's not willing to engage in public debates. Robin DiAngelo is not willing to engage in public debates. They dismiss any counter evidence. I'll give you one little piece, because I think there's a lot of nuance here that gets lost. Certainly, there are some policies that are racist. I think the criminal justice system is probably the main example today where there's still a lot of racism left over in the policies and the application. But I've heard people, critical race theorists, say that every institution of higher education in the United States is systemically racist. But if you, I've been at my college now for 20 years, and I can tell you, if there is a non-racist or anti-racist institution on the planet, it is higher education in the United States. For the last several decades, they have had very aggressive affirmative action in hiring of faculty, affirmative action in race-based admissions, every kind of effort to help racial minorities succeed, to have higher retention rates, higher graduation rates. There is just nothing racist about higher education in the U.S. today, or almost nothing. I mean, it's highly anti-racist, actually, the higher education in the United States. And so, so just to say that every institution is racist, it really, I think, causes us to lose focus on the ones that actually do have racism that we should be focusing on, like the criminal justice system, because it spreads out our efforts, spreads out our energies, our political energy. And if everything is racist, it kind of loses a meaning. It's like sort of the opposite is QAnon. QAnon says every liberal Democrat is a pedophile, a Satan-worshiping pedophile. Well, there are actual pedophiles in the world. If you say everyone who disagrees with you is a pedophile, it loses the ability to find out and stop actual pedophiles. So the word pedophile becomes meaningless. And so,
so I just want to say
Swanson,
this. Wait, Joe, I got to jump in. I'm sorry, Joe.
Come on.
I understand what Professor Swanson is speaking about higher education. I do differ. And I go to Professor Cornell West. I go to other professors. There was another professor at Syracuse, and they're part of higher education. And these professors talk about how they were treated and how they can't receive tenure. So how can we talk about higher education is not racist, where you still have racism within the institution? How, not about just hiring. It's not about affirmative action, just hiring people. It's about treating people fairly. If you don't have those type of professors that are teaching this and can get tenure, and racism is involved in their tenureship, then I don't know if that's why I'm saying I understand painting a broad brush and say everything is racist, but we cannot get away saying that racism is so intertwined into so much here that we gotta continue to have the conversation about it.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm not saying not to. And of course, I'm not saying that there's never any racism that occurs in higher education. But there are certainly, as you point out, there are certainly instances of racism, whether it's at individual students or individual faculty. But to claim that the institutions are systemically, higher education in particular, is systemically racist just goes contrary to all the evidence. Now I'm talking about today, right? The claim is that it's systemically racist today. I think everyone across the political spectrum would agree that prior to the civil rights movement, pretty much every American institution was systemically racist, especially in the South. But the civil rights movement eliminated a lot of that. Like I said, I think the main area where there is still systemic racism is the criminal justice system, which has the most leftover effects from the Jim Crow era of just the whole theory of criminal justice during Jim Crow.
So Dr. Swanson, I see a comment here, and it says only Black people cannot be racist. We do not control anything. We are the victims of a system set forth as such in the U.S. So true enough, when it comes down to people of color, most people of color are victims of racism. So with this critical race theory, here's what I always ask. I see there's so many people who, like in Virginia, they just had an election in Virginia where the main reason they say the governor of Virginia, who is a Republican, who is a conservative, got in is because he said there will not be critical race theory taught in our schools. Well, it's not being taught in the schools anyway. But is that such a hot button issue with people who are not of color that they don't want their children to hear that this country has a history of not treating individuals equally and fairly because of the color of their skin. It's like all of a sudden we want to forget about racism. And you and I have talked about this many a times. I've seen many of your presentations about the lost cause and dealing with Jim Crowism. And the truth about it is, many a times it shames me how folks want to act like none of this really happened or it wasn't that bad.
Yeah, and that's why I think we really need to distinguish accurate history from critical race theory. You can, and like I said, you can teach, and actually, I think that the most scholars of Black history, whether they're white or Black or whatever race, teach it fully and accurately without applying critical race theory. This is something that's become just widespread only in the last couple of years. So we need to separate full and accurate teaching of history from adding on theory or interpretations to that history, such as critical race theory, which is one theory amongst, like I said, different historical theories that you could apply. So, but I did want to respond to that comment or the point. That's actually one of the aspects of critical race theory. Is it says that only Black people or only racial minorities can be racist. And of course, they define racism as having the power to implement discriminatory laws. And so then the theory is that only white people have that power to ever implement, to assert a racist power over anyone else. But that's just not correct. Now maybe at the national level, it's true that whites are a minority, or I'm sorry, whites are majority. But if you look at some state levels where you have Black governors, Black legislators, certainly at the local level, you have cities that are majority Black city councils, Black mayors, school districts where it's Black teachers, Black principals, Black superintendents. They have the authority to do things to white students if they wanted to do things. A city council in a Black controlled city would have the ability to do something to white employees if they wanted. So racism can occur in any situation, right? And so that's, I think, another problem with critical race theory. It says only white people can be racist, but anyone, if they have that ability, can be racist, regardless of your race.
Well, I think that when you get into reverse racism, at the end of the day, I've heard this comment before about Black folks, and see, we have to establish the meaning of words. See, a lot of times we throw out words and don't understand the meaning. We have to understand what racism is. We have to understand what prejudice is. Prejudice is a prefix in a root word there. Prejudge, prejudice, where people judge before. At the end of the day, and when a group, that's why when we talk about racism and we talk about systemic racism and the power to not only have your idea of thought, and I do agree with you, Professor, that there are some folks that are in power that look like me and Joe that abuse their power. At the end of the day, can they be racist at the end of the day? Of course, they can be racist. But when we talk about the institution of racism, it's an institution where it is about power and honestly holding people of color down and back. And that's why we look at it and saying Black folks in this country, even though we have wealth, we do not have that cumulative type of power to do what white folks have done and is still doing to people of color in this country.
So I want to go to this PowerPoint presentation that Dr. Swanson has sent me and it up right here. And Dr. Swanson has explained this to us, the dangers of ideological dogma and hyperpolarism.
Well, beginning probably about in the last year of the last presidential election, I became really increasingly concerned about the political discourse in this country, and not just the discourse, but seeing public attitudes and surveys. We have become not just polarized, but hyperpolarized, and a bunch of the data is in the slides here. And this hyperpolarization is driven, not entirely, but in part by these political dogmas where people are not willing to see the other side. They're not willing to debate, to discuss, to look at counter evidence, to reach across the aisle, to have empathy for the other side. And so we're becoming more and more polarized. And that's leading to both sides, on the left and the right, beginning to fear and have contempt for the other side, even hate the other side. And you'll see in some of the data, if we get to it, surveys within this year, 2021, show that a significant percent of both Democrats and Republicans are beginning to think that violence is okay to use as a means of political change, that a significant percent of both the left and the right thinks we may be headed to a civil war. A significant percent of both Biden and Trump voters think that maybe we should break up into separate parts of the country. I mean, and this is the worst this data has ever been since we've had polling, going back to like scientific polling, going back into around the 1940s. And so the data backs up that it's not just a general sense that people have that we're dangerously polarized. The data backs up we are very dangerously polarized, and we need to take it down a notch. We need to stop treating each other as enemies. And this is the main point, that when you have these dogmas, you get to the point where you think, not only are you right and the other person wrong, you're all good and they're all bad. And that if they disagree with you, they must be not just sincerely mistaken, but evil. And that's where we're increasingly going, with Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, thinking that the other side is not just well-meaning, but mistaken, but evil. And that's when you have very dark consequences happen at a national level.
Let me say this here. So very interesting about this. Again, we're sharing our thoughts, our opinions, and Professor, I really appreciate what you're saying, and you hit some real interesting points. And when you talk about the polling, we look at America being polarized. The problem is that this has never went away. America has never been better. It's just never been better. We're not living in Jim Crow. We're not picking cotton, but the institutions are still there. We're still experiencing it. As you talked about, when it comes down to the criminal justice system, about how it's the racism is embedded in there. I look back at when Senator Obama became the first Black president of these United States. Do you see the backlash? Trump was created because of President Obama. And so you don't think that all of a sudden this type of anger and kind of hatred just all of a sudden was born after President Obama? No, it was already there. It's just that the status quo of those that are in power, or the way of the society of America moves in, it was looked to be threatened. Oh, majorities are going to I hate to use the quote minorities, but people of color, Black, Latino, they are growing so fast that eventually the white race is not going to be the majority in the future. You have Black presidents, you have Black this, Black that. We got to take our country back. You just saw an insurrection of our democracy here at the end of the day. So yes, we are polarized, but it's never disappeared. The problem is we didn't have folks that would speak up against us, that were under, the foot was on our neck at the end of the day. And now all of a sudden, some white folks, I have to look at that their institution of America is being threatened. And we have to do any and everything, even to the point of destroy democracy of this country, to make sure their way is gonna live through. And I just think that that's why we have to have this conversation. And those folks that disagree of having a conversation about race, I don't think it's my opinion. I think it's a fact. They're foolish, and we cannot get rid of the problem if you don't have a discussion and fight to rid of this illness and sickness of those folks.
So let me ask this question, and Brother Fatim, that was wonderfully said. Dr. Swanson, in your opinion, teaching these things about the untruths of the lost cause, teaching the truth about racism and why it occurred in the Jim Crow era, and why some folks have not progressed as far as other folks because they didn't get the same the same treatment as other folks. You have to really understand this. I can truly say, and I believe Brother Fatim can say this too, at the time I was born, I wasn't considered to be what I am today. If you look at my birth certificate, it doesn't say African American on my birth certificate. I was born in Memphis, Tennessee in 1967. In 1967, which is 1 year before, in the same city Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated, An African American child was not known as an African American. You know, and because we didn't have the same starting point as other folks, a lot of us, that's the reason. Now we've achieved a lot. We have achieved a lot, you know, and then we have great people like yourself, Dr. Swanson, who I know fight daily for what's right. How do you feel about the teaching of this in school, the teaching of this across the board, that people have a clear understanding? This is why some black folks are angry. This is why some folks are feeling like, you know, we didn't get a fair handshake from Jump Street, and we never got any type of reparations. Dr. Swanson.
Yeah. As you know, I always in my presentations talk about the lingering effects of Jim Crow, whether it's the wealth disparities between white and black, income disparities, but mostly the wealth disparity. So we still have segregated neighborhoods that are left over from Jim Crow. And because school districts are assigned usually by neighborhoods, that means that most school districts, or many, are still racially segregated. The criminal justice system, like I said, still has a lot of reforms it needs. So you have these lingering effects of Jim Crow that we're still dealing with today. Absolutely. Like I said, I've always talked about that. And again, I think all that can and should be dealt with. But the problem is that now when you add in critical race theory, it so poisons the discussion that, like you said, you have this backlash where people think that anytime you talk about race, that is, people who are opposed to this, they think anytime you talk about race, it must be critical race theory. But that's not the case at all. You can have full and accurate and honest discussions about the current disparities that exist as a result of the lingering effects of Jim Crow without bringing in critical race theory. And it's just muddled the whole political conversation today, this critical race theory. Because I rarely hear anyone on the left or right, even in these major national news organizations, that even understands the theory.
Right. And I was just here looking at an article while you were talking. I was actually on my phone looking at something. It seems to be that the right, that the conservative movement is trying to use the word critical race theory as one of their key words of, now you're trying to teach, quote unquote, your black history to my children, to make them feel that we as white people are bad people because of what we did during slavery. And then they come with that favorite line. Well, that wasn't me. That might have been my ancestors, but that wasn't me. But you were a direct benefactor of what your ancestors did. There are individuals who have land, wealth, who have accumulated things because of the evils of slavery. If it hadn't been for the evils of slavery and we had an even playing field, some of the stuff you have, you might not have it. So,
right.
That's where I'm trying to find out, how do we get to the point where we tell the truth, teach the truth, and people understand that you might not have to agree with the truth, but the truth is still the truth. I might not agree that the sun is shining, but that don't mean the sun ain't shining.
Right. But let me just say this real quick, and then the professor, and that's why I really want to get into the conversation, the attack on pulling out books that deals with the achievement of Black folks here in America, African Americans, however you want to call them in the respectful name. But critical race theory is and the professor broke this down earlier. It's critical race theory. You know, you have a denotative and a connotative meaning of a word, and sometimes a word or a phrase can take on another meaning. But critical race theory is a framework of analysis grounded in critical theory, as the professor said, and an academic movement of civil rights scholars and activists who seek to examine the intersection of race and law in the United States. And that's why this gets diluted when we continue to bring up critical race theory and then talk about where there's a movement, there's Republican legislators across this country that have written policy to keep Black thought, Black history out of schools. We can't continue to use that word CRT, critical race theory, because that's the boogeyman. And if we keep using that as the boogeyman, then we're not going to get, there's a legislator in Texas that pulled over 1,000 books that they want to pull out of the school system. That is unheard of. And if we don't have that conversation, and if we dilute it with critical race theory and don't understand what critical race theory and the threat of American history and African American history then we are headed down a very dangerous road, Professor.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in what you just said. And actually, those lists of books that they're dealing with in Texas, a lot of that actually is LGBTQ books that they're trying to take
That is
out.
correct. That is correct.
In fact, that was we just had here in Lafayette, Louisiana. Last night, there was a meeting of the library board where a religious conservative, ironically, not even from our own parish, challenged a pro-gay book for teens to try to have it removed from the library, not just shelved in the adult section, but actually removed from the entire library. And by a 4-2 vote of the library board, they decided just to move it into the adult section, but not to remove it. So it was a small victory here in Lafayette, Louisiana, against censorship. But you're right. Absolutely, we need to have this history taught. Joe, I've been arguing for this for years, to have more Black history in our local schools, because at least here for Lafayette, Louisiana, when I first started looking into this, there was no books that almost nothing was taught or written down about Black history here in the region of South Central Louisiana. And so I've been trying to uncover that over a series of years. I did want to go back to Brother Fatine. Earlier, you were saying about one of the things that led to this hyperpolarization. That I did want to point out that I think that there's a couple other issues that we need to look at that are only really tangentially related to race. One is the fact that throughout most of the last century, we had a large external enemy, right? We had World War I, World War II, and the Cold War. So, Germany, and then Russia. And once you had the end of the Cold War, we briefly united against the Taliban and Iraq. But then after that, we have no external enemy. And so in this kind of peaceful world, we've ended up turning in on ourselves, looking for internal enemies. But that's just one component of it. Another and really big one is the rise of social media. Because if you look at this polarization, this hyperpolarization began around in the 80s and the 90s, and certainly is carried into the 2000s. First, you had the rise of cable television. And let me back up. Before cable television, you had only a handful of national TV networks. So everyone was seeing the same news on TV. Now, you might have different interpretations of that news. We still had Democrats and Republicans and liberals and conservatives. But everyone at least had the same shared reality. But with the rise of cable news, you had breaks into CNN and Fox, where you had liberal and conservative news. And now with social media, the algorithms on Facebook, the artificial intelligent algorithms, actually just send you to views like stories, political news that you already agree with, and try to make you outraged. There's a psychological principle called the negativity bias. It's well documented that people actually remember, they're more likely to remember and react more strongly to things they disagree with than things they agree with. So for example, I can use this presentation. You might agree with 99% of what I say throughout this whole presentation, hypothetically, but it's that 1% you're going to remember, and you're going to go home and talk to your spouse or your friend. Can you believe Dr. Swanson said that one thing? I can't. Never mind that you agreed with the other 99%. So here's what social media is doing. Literally, they have programmed it because they are aware of the negativity bias. It's a very real psychological thing. And so they send you to stories that they think are going to provoke outrage in you, outrage against the other side. So if you're liberal, they send you the most extreme things that the conservatives are doing. If you're conservative, it's sending you the most extreme things liberals are doing. And so you literally have these bubbles, these isolated bubbles in social media where the liberals are just becoming more and more outraged at the conservatives are becoming more and more outraged by the liberals, because there's no shared reality anymore. There isn't even a shared reality of facts anymore. I mean, look at the big lie that Trump says the election was stolen from him in the complete absence of any systematic or widespread fraud. He says it, and a large percent of Republicans believe it because the only news they're getting is this right-wing news. And so that polarization is just increasing because we live literally now in these separate worlds where we don't even share the same factual reality.
Yeah, Joe, you brought up something that was interesting, and I'm going to go here. And this is not to embarrass anyone. I'm just trying to make a point. Joe, you brought up the word reparations earlier. And when we hear reparations, of course, especially coming from people of color born here in America, we're talking about repairing damage done to a group, an individual or a group of people done by other folks. And we've seen reparations paid to Japan and other folks that America has done wrong by. You look at World War II, the bombing of Hiroshima or Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we paid reparations. We were in World War II with that. And we look at the slave trade and the fight for reparations of Black folks here in America. I just don't want to say African Americans. You have Caribbean Americans. You have so many folks that were part of
People
the
of color.
slave trade. So when
People
you
of
talk
color.
about reparations, but this is what I wanted to bring up also, to talk about the repair and the tack. If we bring up Dr. King right now, and if I ask you, and you deal with higher education, if I ask you brothers to name 4 books by Dr. King, you can do it. You might can. But if you can name those 4 books, you look at the history books of Dr. King and you ask a young person today, who was Dr. King? He led a march. He fought for the people. He fought against fought against Jim Crow. He got shot and killed. Dr. King wrote numerous books. Why We Can't Wait. Strength to Love. Chaos, where do we go from here? Chaos of Community. So what I'm saying is they don't teach that in school. If you want to know about Dr. King, why don't they teach what he wrote? Because then you understand. Do you understand Why We Can't Wait? He included the letter from the Birmingham jail. I'm just only putting this out here for the facts that's what I'm saying. How are you going to attack and say, well, that kind of history makes white kids feel bad, so we don't want to teach that? But that's the history of this country. And if we're going to move forward, how can you talk about reparations and repair an ill if you don't talk about what was done to create that illness to our people? So that's the danger of pulling those kind of books and that information, not teaching that information in our school system here in America.
Fatim, you have a great point there, and I'm gonna let Dr. Swanson respond to that. I went to a presentation, and Dr. Swanson, I'm trying to remember the slave's name in your presentation that had all the whips on his back from the whip.
Yeah, it's either Gordon or Peter, depending on they're really
Gordon. Right. So he does a presentation, and he does this presentation to people who are really there. Most of the times when I've been at Dr. Swanson's presentation, there's more people non-black in the room than there are blacks. But when he did this presentation and he showed Gordon, this guy who wound up fighting with the Union against the Confederacy, and he shows him without his shirt on and what the whips did to his back, which is horrifying. You can see folk in there get uncomfortable and look uncomfortable, like somebody actually did this to somebody. Yes, and that's the point. We cannot sit here and act like this didn't happen. So when you sit there and hear folks, and you hear it sometimes on some of these conservative media platforms, oh, slavery wasn't that bad. Come on, they make it seem like people of color are savages that got saved by the Almighty and brought to a place of milk and honey. No, you went and got doctors, architects. You got people of great mind thinking who just happened, as we one time said in one of our shows, Fatim, you went and captured intelligent minds who the reason they seemed the way they seemed to you was because they didn't speak your language. It's just like if you and I right now went to a country that we had no idea what people were saying, and we winded up being in servitude in that country. Of course, they wouldn't understand what we're doing because we wouldn't understand what they're doing. And we've got to wake up and start saying, teach the history as it happened, no matter whose feelings get hurt. Because the truth of the matter is, what happened. The brutality of slavery, the brutality of what they did to women of color, the brutality of what they did to men of color happened. And if you won't teach it like it happened, then you can't sit there and try to make it seem like we got saved by somebody, by you taking us out the jungle and out the bush and we had bones in our noses, because that's not the truth.
But also, Joe, you made a great point, and I want the professor to respond to that. But I want to add this to what you just said. You said what had happened. What the hell is happening today? I have to hit the table. I'm sorry.
Come on, come
I
on.
gotta hit the damn table because it's still happening to today. If you look at black and brown kids, men and women shot down, innocent shot down due to racism, police brutality in the street that continues to happen today, and some go unpunished. But if somebody mistreats a dog or abuse a dog, those folks that do that get more time than those that shoot down a black man or a black woman in America. That's happening today. So you can't just not have a conversation about yesterday. You got to have a conversation about today. Professor, I'm sorry to get so animated, but I get emotional because what happened yesterday, it's not gone. It's happening today. It's changed its form. And that's why at the end of the day, you have so much emotion because people of color or anybody that's backed into the corner, they're going to come out fighting because they're tired of going through this. You walk outside, you're walking while black, you're driving while black, you're treated differently while you're black. You go in the store, you're followed because you're black. This is horrible. Oprah Winfrey was followed in a store years ago. So come on, she has more money than a lot of folks out here. So that's why we get emotional. And when folks tell us, well, we don't want to talk about race, hell with you. I'm sorry to say that, but we're still feeling the effects of that kind of racism.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I get animated and emotional because I go through this today. I get pulled over. You know, when I get pulled over, I can be shot and killed.
I mean, you have nothing to apologize for. Don't apologize. I mean, this is a passionate topic. You know, they used to say, don't talk about politics or religion. And now it's don't talk about race if you want to keep your friends because it's such a charged issue these days. But look, you're absolutely right. You know, we need to talk about this. And I've been arguing for it vigorously for years here, at least on the local level here. There needs to be more history in the local schools here, more Black history to show not just what happened, but the lingering effects to show what's still going on today. I think that the best thing would be to educate people about how current policies are affecting communities of color. Like the single biggest thing I think that would really make a difference would be to end the war on drugs. You know, legalize drugs, control it, regulate it like alcohol or cigarettes. You would take out all the incentive to engage in the black market, sale, distribution, production of drugs. And it would encourage people to say, okay, I'm going to have to turn to legal means then to earn an income. And I think that would then right there, I mean, if you look at the percentage, and I'm not aware of the exact statistics, but you might know the percent of people that are incarcerated for drug crimes. It's a very large percent of those that are incarcerated. It's just whether it's possession or repeat possession, sale. It's just the war on drugs has really been a war on minority communities. So
and hold it. Now that's a good point because I want to bookmark that right there, Dr. Swanson. I'm going to let you keep talking. I got to say this. You know, the sad thing to me about this so-called quote unquote war on drugs is that until people figured out a way to make money, big money legally with the drug market, when big money was being made by minority communities in the drug market, drugs were illegal. You know, it all of a sudden makes you feel like the game is just not the same. There's two sets of standards. And Fatim, if I'm wrong, check me on this. It's like when we figured out a way to make money off of selling weed, it was illegal. And a lot of folks got 3 strikes and got life in prison and families got tore apart. But now all of a sudden you got cats in Colorado and where else is marijuana and in state of Washington and other different places that these folks are now multi-millionaires slanging weed just like the brothers used to slang weed on the corner. But they have now legal dispensaries that do it. And it's legal because they legalized it in the state legislature and the government figured out a way how to tax it. I mean, once again, every state that has legalized weed need to go to their prison system and release everybody who got incarcerated for selling weed.
And they're doing
Am
that.
I sounding crazy when I
No,
say that?
you're not sounding crazy, and that's what they're doing in New York and New Jersey. They are going back into the prison system, or those folks that have had records, and they're expunging their records dealing with weed. But let's talk about the number system, especially in New York City. You got to realize the number record was controlled by the mob, the Italian mob. You had different groups of mobs. I don't want to just leave it to the Italians. They had different mob. You had the Jewish mob. You had this, that, and other, and they had their hands in it. Then you had blacks that came into the business. And when America or the system or the government saw that they could not beat them or put this down, what did they do? The best way to put it down is to join them and to tax it, as you say. So you look at the number system, 50 states wide. There is a lottery system that if you make X amount of dollars, you get taxed, and the government has a hand in the cookie jar. And that's what they're doing with the whole situation with marijuana. Now, Professor Swanson talks about that the whole war on drugs and that they should legalize drugs. And I do understand the war on drugs is really a war on blacks and browns in this country. But at the end of the day, again, the system winds up winning this whole battle. So I think there's a conversation that needs to be had about how the government comes in, legalize things that they have deemed illegal, and make money. And at the end of the day, people like us have suffered and continue to suffer.
Dr. Swanson.
Yeah, I think this actually is part of a larger problem. Again, it goes back to the criminal justice system of either whether you call it over-criminalization or hyper-criminalization. I think this is one possible ground that liberals and conservatives can come together on to say there's just too many laws. Because look, conservatives say they want less government. There's a libertarian streak in the conservative movement. Well, then get rid of a lot of these crimes that are just silly, stupid, petty. I mean, look, was it Eric Garner in New York? I think it was Eric Garner. I mean, he ended up dying at the hands from a chokehold by police because he was selling individual cigarettes. This was the great crime for which he was stopped by police, for selling individual cigarettes out of a pack. Why was that even a law? Why was it even enforced, even if it was still in the books? There's so many laws that are just ridiculous. And if you decriminalize all these petty things, by definition, you're going to have fewer criminals because you make less things a crime.
That's good. A great example. And just to let folks know that, or looking across the country, that policy was implemented by the police department here in New York City, and it was called broken windows. You try to get rid of those petty crimes that lead up to bigger crimes at the end of the day. But again, we found that, as the professor said, systemic racism involved in that at the end of the day. And here we go again, as you said, selling Lucy cigarettes, as they call it in New York. A man died of an illegal chokehold. That's not even a legal chokehold. That is deemed illegal in the state of New York.
Yeah, but again, why was that even enforced? I mean, if I'm a police officer and I find out this, with all the violent crime going on, who cares if he's selling individual cigarettes? That is so petty. It's not worth my time. And to get a bunch of police officers and to put them in a chokehold, legal or otherwise, or illegal, it's just foolishness. It's nonsense. And so, again, it goes back to I think the biggest area still, or at least one of the biggest areas of holdovers from Jim Crow, is the entire criminal justice system. It needs a massive reform from the ground up, not just questions of policing, but the laws, how are they enforced, the criminal justice system. You have the school to prison pipeline right now that needs to get dealt with. There's just so many issues. Joe, you mentioned earlier the 3 strikes are out, when oftentimes the 3 strikes are the tiniest petty crimes, and you're sentenced to life in prison. As you said, it destroys families. The policy is, to use the word draconian, is just exceptionally harsh and punitive. And that's one of the reasons that we have such high incarceration rates amongst Black youth and Black males.
Exactly.
I mean, you got to be real about it. And a lot of people don't want to talk about it. And maybe even with me talking about it, there's going to be some people that get a little bit upset. But here's the truth and the facts of the matter. Fact number one, and I don't know if these are the correct numbers, but it feels like, let me act like they act sometimes. It feels like there's more men of color. And I use the word men of color because everybody's not African American. There are Caribbean, there are people from Caribbean descent, there are people from Hispanic descent, that are people of color that look as black as I look, that are not African American. So there are men of color who are incarcerated. And it seems like there's more men of color that are incarcerated than there are free men walking around helping father their children, helping society move forward, helping our communities grow and build. It's sad to me, especially for black women. And then let's not talk about the disrespect of black women. Let's not even go there. But then on top of all that, then I have to put the heavy crown on everybody's head about us disrespecting one another. So I sit here and get highly upset and say to myself, what the hell going on? Because if it ain't somebody who don't look like me trying to tear me down, then there's somebody who looks just like me trying to tear me down. And we got to wake up. I feel sometimes like Spike Lee in School Days. I want to run outside and just scream, wake up. But the problem is some of y'all are so comfortable living a lie and being asleep that waking up and facing the truth ain't even in your vocabulary. And
But when
that's sad
folks,
to me.
but when folks do wake up, so let's say this: when somebody does wake up, I'll use Colin Kaepernick as an example for now. So here's a individual, a brother. I know Colin Kaepernick, and here's a brother who said that I'm going to take a knee. I'm taking a knee. I'm not taking a knee against the flag. I'm taking a knee for the hell and the racism that my folks that continue to catch in this country. I'm just going to go silent at the end of the day. Now, when you take a stand, Joe, and stand up, then society comes down on you. Not only did white folks come down on him, black folks. Black folks came down on him because they wanted to have their damn Sunday football, Monday night football, and Thursday night football, and they didn't want to feel uncomfortable dealing with the fact. But look, when Colin Kaepernick took the knee and all the hype that came out of it, and then look, last month and a half ago, what came out and continues to come out in football? We just seen a coach. We see a basketball owner under investigation due to misogyny, racism. So what Colin Kaepernick was talking about was true, but he came under ridicule for just exposing what of some folks that continue to experience out here. That's why I say when folks do stand up, at the end of the day, you wind up putting your life, your career, and your family lives on the line sometime.
Well, I'm going to let Dr. Swanson close us out. But, I can only use the same line that was used in A Few Good Men. Some folk can't handle the truth. And I'm asking myself, is that ultimately the problem? That all of a sudden you got to sit down okay, watch this. It's very uncomfortable for me, Brother Fatim, to sit down with my sons and have with them the uncomfortable conversation of this is how you need to conduct yourself should you ever get pulled over by a law enforcement officer. Now, I understand there are some people who are not people of color, that are people of Caucasian descent that may never have that conversation with their little son about when they get pulled over by the police. But I have to have that conversation with my son. Just like that's uncomfortable for me to have that conversation, damn it should be uncomfortable for you to have a conversation about, guess what? Our ancestors a long time ago owned people and did terrible things to those people and stole their land and wouldn't let them vote and wouldn't let them read and would beat them and rape their children and their wives and their women. Just like I have the uncomfortable conversation of telling my son how he got to watch himself when he gets pulled over by the police, you should have that uncomfortable conversation. Dr. Swanson, I'm sorry.
Joe, you have nothing to apologize for. I think, well, I don't know how to close out a show like this, but I'll tell you this goes back to how I end all my presentations is to say, look, just like in any relationship, if you want that relationship to work, you've got to learn to communicate. You have to listen. You have to have empathy and have compassion and mercy and forgiveness and do things to redeem yourself, with the other person, to make amends, sort of like in AA, say you got to make amends when you do wrong. And so a marriage needs that for it to work, a business partnership, a friendship. And our country needs that. Okay. If we don't listen to one another, regardless of, your race or your politics, if we don't listen to one another, if we don't try to empathize with one another, and if we don't deeply reflect on what have we done to hurt each other and try to make amends for that, not just apologize, but make amends for it. I'll put it this way, like the people in the United States as a whole, it's kind of like a national marriage, right? We're not going anywhere. You're not going to have all the races suddenly split up and go to different continents, back to their homeland continents. We're here in a permanent marriage, and we either have to make it work or we'll end up killing each other. And so we're going to have another civil war. And so we've got to learn to live together in mutual respect. And again, for all those things I said, we just have to learn to live together. And it's going to take hard work on everyone's part.
Brother Fatin.
I agree with you, Dr. Swanson. I want to thank you for coming on and having this conversation. And this is to show that when we have these kind of conversations, we are willing to speak with all, because at the end of the day, this is a fight of bringing truth to the conversation. But let me just say this, Joe, you mentioned about what we do to one another. And when we get a group of young folks and we have a conversation with them and we talk about what we do, black on black or black to black crime to one another, we talk about the ill effects of that. So when we have the conversation about race and racism is ugly, and the conversation about race can be uncomfortable. But if we're going to deal with righting or wrong, we have to put the facts on the table,
right,
and to move forward, to get through that emotional part, to get to resolutions, to make things better. But if you exclude the truth from the conversation, and then folks find out down the line you exclude it because some group was uncomfortable, especially if their ancestors were the ones that perpetrated those ills and crimes on the people, then at the end of the day, you're going to have people more angry and you're going to have more confusion. And then you're going to honestly wind up being further back than when you're moving forward.
That's real talk. So, family, here's what I'm going to do. And Dr. Swanson and I'm going to bring Dr. Swanson back because this slide presentation he has, I really want us to go through the slide presentation. I think it would help people understand the divide and how certain powers to be are trying to constantly divide us, because we have to understand the attack of the enemy in order to formulate strategies to counterattack and bring back the love. I always say love over hate, but if people are always pushing hate, you'll never be able to love, because every story you hear, as Dr. Swanson said earlier, will be always propagating you to hate somebody because they're going to tell you the worst about people. Let me tell you this. There are good people who are not black who do great things, and there are good people who are black that do great things, and we've got to look at the good in people, and we got to start telling people, you know what, everybody ain't what some folk are, and it's more the minority of evil than it is the minority. They make it seem like the minority of evil is actually the majority, but there's more good people out here than there are bad people. And the problem is you're not hearing the good stories. And that's why we created this platform, because we're going to have to be the change we want to see. And it's not going to be comfortable. And yes, we're going to say some things that's going to make some people mad, but the truth is never comfortable. The truth is quite bitter. It has never been sweet. The truth is bitter when you have to look yourself in the mirror and say, I may be a part of the problem. So I got to fix myself that I can become a part of the solution. So, family, Dr. Swanson, thank you for taking time out. And
Thanks
I'm
for having
sorry,
me.
I apologize. We didn't really even get to your slide. So what I'm going to do
All
is get
good.
with
All
I'm going
good.
to I'm going to get with you, and we're actually going to have a show where we're going to go through the whole slide, where maybe people can understand the division and understand some of this great research that you put together to make people understand that, this is a systematic attack on people's consciousness to all of a sudden either go one way or the other way, when the truth about it is we all got some good and bad in us. We just need to be honest.
Right.
Let's be honest. This is all about being honest. What's wrong with telling the honest God truth about slavery? What's wrong with telling the honest God truth about Jim Crow? What's wrong with telling the honest God truth? Because you don't have a problem telling the honest God truth about drugs in the hood, about crime in the hood. Every time I turn on some networks, that's all they talking about, what's going wrong in the hood. Well, let's talk about how all of a sudden you amassed all this wealth back in the day when your great grandfather was a slave owner. That's all I'm saying. So, family, listen,
Yeah.
thank you for
Mhm.
logging in. Thank you for being a part of our community
Mhm.
conversation. Let me
Mhm.
pull.
Could I just
Let me
say one
pull.
thing to Dr. Swanson so
Yeah, go ahead. Go
he
ahead.
doesn't seem blindsided? I would like to invite, and you gave me the opportunities to do it tonight, and I did not want to do that tonight. I wanted the Dr. Swanson to come on by himself, but I would like to have Dr. Swanson back and bring on my brother, Principal. We call him Principal Baruti Kinfele, because he goes around the country and he not only speaks on this, but he teaches principals and other educators of how to deal with race and having that kind of conversation. And I would love for both of you to be part of that conversation for our audience, because I think our audience will really benefit. So again, I thank you for coming on
Thanks, Rick.
this evening, and to have this difficult conversation, because this is not an easy conversation to have. But when you are a good-hearted person and you mean well, but you got to realize we can learn. And sometimes we have to go, I didn't see it from that perspective. Maybe I do need to look at it from this perspective. And that's why we have to have these kind of conversations.
Yeah,
So
man.
again, thank you.
So
Thank you.
thank you, Dr. Swanson. I'm gonna pull Dr. Swanson out just for a minute. Stay on the line, Dr. Swanson. Don't go nowhere. So as I pull Dr. Swanson out, and it's just me and Fatim. Listen, family, thank y'all for logging in. Yes, we're here having community conversations, and sometimes in the scheme of things to bring about the greater good for all. We're going to have some conversations that are going to make you say, ooh, things that make you say, things that make you itch a little bit. But at the end of the day, we do it out of love because we're not here to tell you how to think, but we're here to tell you do your own research and begin to think for yourself. Brother Fatim, you got some closing words as we get up out of here?
Brother, I just think that, this was a conversation that is needed. We are going through a lot in this country, and we need to continue to bring these kind of conversations to our folks. And then, as you just say, you lead the people to the water. You can't make them drink, but you lead them to the water. So
Amen.
that's it. So amen, my brother.
Amen. So everybody keep everybody in prayer who has lost somebody due to violence, due to racism, due to the issues of the world that were not right. Keep those families lifted up in prayer during these holiday season, because the holidays is a hard time when you've lost somebody that you shouldn't have lost to whatever it was that was the ills of the world. We love y'all. We'll see you next Tuesday. Don't forget tomorrow night. I'll be back on with Wellness Wednesday, where we're talking about mental health and what you got going on for team.
I'll be on. You go to the Facebook page, WBLS 1075 NYC at 8 p.m. Eastern time to 10 p.m. We will be open line online. We'll be discussing the issues that affect us as a people.
All right, family, we up out of here. Peace. Y'all have a great night. We out. Peace.
Peace.